North Star Parent Production Group. We produce the spring musical. I would like to welcome you to our first ever musical debate. We thought it would be an interesting idea to draw attention not only to the fact that we're doing this musical, Urinetown, with the world's worst title, but that there are actually some, even though the show Urinetown is a satire and it's a comedy, and it's a story that takes place in the future where there was a 20-year drought, and as a result, the government decided that they were going to restrict the use of water because it was an emergency. So the way they decided to do that was a very unusual way. They decided to ban private bathrooms, so you could not go to the bathroom in your own home. Imagine, if you will, having to go to the bathroom in a public amenity. Now, the authors of Urinetown were these two college buddies from the University of Chicago who were musicians and real intellectuals. One of them was traveling through Europe when he was in his 20s, and he didn't realize, I don't know if any of you have traveled to Europe, but you actually, if you go to a public bathroom, there are little collection buckets. So you actually have to pay a couple of coins to go to the bathroom. So when he was traveling, he was on a budget, and he didn't realize he had to pay to go to the bathroom during the day. So he had to kind of think about how often he was going to the bathroom during the day. So he said, you know, this is a great idea for a musical. And he wrote a musical. And he wrote it with his buddy, and it was such an absurd premise that you'd have to pay to go to the bathroom, and if you didn't follow those rules, you'd get sent to Urinetown, which I don't want to give away what happens, because I want you to all come to the show next weekend. But basically, nobody wanted to produce the show because it was completely outrageous. So they produced it themselves, and lo and behold, the show was an absolute hit. It opened on Broadway right after 9/11 in 2001, and it has become a continued hit for high schools and colleges. So it's actually a pretty intellectual story. If you pay attention, it's not just a comedy, but if you actually listen to the lyrics, it actually says a lot about the environment, and it talks about whether you should be concerned for your freedoms today, or if you should worry about long-term availability of water given a drought. So, it's a little bit of a heavy topic, but it's funny, there's a lot of laughs. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little preview performance. We have some of the members of the cast. These are the poor who have to go to the bathroom at the poorest urinal in town. It's called Public Amenity Number 9. They have to pay. The urinal is run by Miss Pennywise, aptly named, and she collects the fee to go to the bathroom, and she enforces the rules. She has to explain to the poor why they have to pay to go to the bathroom. So what happens in this scene is that we have the hero of the story, Bobby Strong. His father doesn't have enough money to go to the bathroom. So that sort of sets the stage for the scene, Privilege to Pee. So we're going to do the number. Pay attention to the lyrics, because that'll tell you a little bit about why the government made the rules that it did. And then afterwards, we're going to introduce our debaters and our moderators. I'll just say basically the debate topic for today is whether the federal government should restrict the use of water. Okay, so we have two debaters. We have Jason Gallant from Westhill, who's co-captain of the Westhill debate team, and we have Sam Aldershoff from Stanford High. Sam and Jason are both champion debaters, and we're all going to work really hard to keep up with them. Our moderator today is Dan Schwartz, law partner at Day Pitney in Stanford, and also a Urinetown cast member parent. So we do have handouts for everybody in the audience. Did you guys get them? Okay. Can you read them later? There's a lot of information on it. I do want you to pay attention because there are some educational points that we're trying to raise here. One of the pages is a chart, so if you happen to have something to write with, or you could do this later. I'd like you to, when we get to the part of the debate, I'd like you to actually write down the points that are made on the affirmative that says we should restrict water, and I'd like you to put in your points, the points that are made on the negative, that we should not restrict water. And at the end of the debate will run about a half an hour, all right? And then we're gonna open it up to you guys, because you're gonna judge who wins the debate. But we're not gonna just do a show of hands. Guys, can you stop talking? We're not gonna do a show of hands. We're gonna actually ask some of you to come up to the microphone and tell us how you were persuaded, which arguments in particular did you find were strongest and why? And then after that, we'll have a show of hands, and then you guys can go to the third lunch wave at 12:30. Okay, without further ado, I present to you the cast of Urinetown, the musical.
I haven't got it.
Then go get it.
Come on, Penny. You know I'm good for it.
That's what you said last week, and I still haven't seen Penny one. And it's Miss Pennywise to you.
Bobby, Risa was the woman. I'm a little short this morning.
No shorter than yesterday. Unless I've grown.
He's my Thomas Pennywise. Can't he go for free just this once?
Get your head out of the clouds, Bobby Strong. No one gets in for free.
Now, Miss Pennywise, we've all made special arrangements with people in high places over the years. Why don't we let this one be ours?
If Old Man Strong gets it for free, then so do I.
And I.
Quiet back there. No one's getting anywhere for free. Don't you think you got bills of my own to pay? Don't you think I have taxes and tear-offs and payoffs to meet too? Well, I do. And I don't pay them with promises, see? I pay them with cash. Cold, hard cash. Every morning you all come here, and every morning tell me I got reasons why you ain't gonna pay. And I'm here to tell you, you is gonna pay.
But, Miss Pennywise.
No buts, Bobby.
In the name of God, Penny, what difference could it make?
What difference? Tons of hard cash this type, you've got no right, I've heard it all before. Just this once too much. Just once they once the one, once more. I run the only toilets in this part of town, you see. So if you've gotta go, you've got to go through me. It's a privilege to be. Water's worth its weight in gold these days. No more bathrooms like in olden days. You come here and pay a fee for the privilege to be. 20 years we've had the drought, and our reservoirs have all dried up. I take my bath down with a coffee cup. I boil what's left of it for tea, and it's a privilege to be. The politicians in their wisdom saw that there should be a law, and the politicians tax the toilets and make legal public urination and defecation. So come and give your point to me. Write your name here in the record book. The authorities will want to look if you've been regular with me. If you pay the proper fee for the privilege to be. It's a privilege to be. No fuss about your sweet looking boy that likes to keep you around. This man ain't coming in without pay. Not this time!
Don't tell her what I might do.
You think you've got some kind of right. See you coming here and go for free. The only thing you get is a no for free. I'm a business gal, you see. I sell the privilege to be. The Lord made us, so we kiss each day until we kiss away. The Lord made sure that what goes in bed will soon come out again. So you're no different then. or better yet, have you arrested.
I'm through with all this, you see.
To prefer the law gets tested. And if you're in town, you see.
Crazy with measures at the
But
day.
it's dumb to fight with me.
It's no way to live, I tell you. No way to live.
For the privilege to peace. War, war, war.
Okay, thank you guys. And if you want to see what happens to Old Man Strong, you have to come to the show this weekend, Friday, Saturday, 7:30. Okay, now we're going to set up for the debate. So just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. Okay, so we're going to have,
Test, 1, 2.
all right, keep going. Okay, so now I'm going to call up, guys, do you have the handouts? Turn to the page with the chart, okay? Take out your pencils, which you probably don't have. Okay, all right, so now I'd like to call Jason and Sam up and Dan Tork. Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Schwartz.
Well, welcome everybody. I think this is the first Urinetown debate that certainly that I've had the privilege to moderate. And you're lucky you will be hearing from two excellent debaters today. I've seen both of them in action in a variety of debates over the years. And I think it'll be a very spirited debate. Just one thing you should realize before we start the debate. As Nancy was saying, the show Urinetown is a satire, and it's funny, and it deals with a topic in a very funny, humorous way. But it's really a very serious topic that we're analyzing today, and that these two students are going to debate. The real question is, under what circumstances should the government impose restrictions on the use of resources by its citizens? And this is a real issue that's come up in history a number of times. You've probably studied in your history classes that during various wars, the governments had to restrict the use of natural resources. They put restrictions on when people could buy eggs or butter or sugar. And in the early 1970s, I don't know if you had a chance to study this, but there was an oil embargo, and there was not enough gas to go around for use of automobiles. The United States government put significant restrictions on when you could buy gas and how much gas you could buy. So it really is a serious topic. What we're going to debate today is the issue of water use. And the resolution in this debate is going to be whether or not the United States government should impose significant restrictions on the consumption of water. The affirmative side is going to be argued by Sam Aldershot from Stanford High. He's going to take the position that there should be significant restrictions. The negative side is going to be argued by Jason Gown. He's going to argue that the government should not impose restrictions. Please listen carefully to the debate. It will go quite rapidly. They'll have a chance to cross-examine one another. And afterwards, I'm going to ask you, what points did you think were important? What points did you think were the best arguments and the people that made the best points? So let's be courteous to the debaters, and we will start the debate. The format, as you will see, is affirmative will go first for 6 minutes, Then negative will have a chance to cross-examine. Then negative will go for 6 minutes, and affirmative will have a chance to cross-examine. And then there'll be closing rebuttal argument. Ma'am, if you'd like to start, please.
Hello? Okay. So my name is Sam Aldershot from Stanford High School, and today I'm here to urge the affirmation of the resolution that the United States government should substantially increase restrictions on consumption of water in the United States. Now, I have two contentions in support of this resolution. The first is that the status quo, the way things are, is unsustainable. And my second contention is that without restrictions on water consumption, we face inevitable environmental damage. Now, before I get into these two contentions, I would first like to lay out a plan for how I'm going to actually enact this resolution. And that plan is that I'm going to offer tax credits for people who purchase things that substantially reduce the amount of water they consume. This could include things like low-flow plumbing, low-flush toilets, and low-flow shower heads. According to the American Water Works Association, a nonprofit educational association established in 1881, if every household were to install features like this, water use would decrease by about 30%. So we really see that this would be a substantial decrease. So going into my first contention, which again is that the status quo is unsustainable. Now, the way things are going to work is that the demand for water will continue to increase as the population increases. However, the supply will not. We get the majority of our water via aquifers, reservoirs, things that are primarily filled in through precipitation, and of course we cannot increase precipitation. However, our population in the United States continues to increase at about a rate of 0.9%, about 1% a year. So the amount of people using water is actually increasing, whereas the amount of water we have to use is not. So eventually we're going to have to turn to other methods for obtaining water, drinking water. This would likely include things like desalination, that is taking water from the ocean and removing salt from it. Now, this actually happened in California very recently in San Diego County, where they had to spend $1 billion to construct a desalination plant, which will only go online in 2016. So that's $1 billion, and unfortunately that desalination plant will only meet 7% of that county's actual water needs. So we're spending $1 billion in a single county for something that is only going to meet about 7% of that county's needs. Now this of course does not include inevitable costs like the energy for the desalination and maintaining that water plant. So this is a huge expenditure, and we would like to avoid it in the first place. So rather than have to turn to other methods like desalination, we would prefer to be able to just reduce the amount of water we consume so that we can rely on those reservoirs and aquifers. And this is a very achievable goal. Under the status quo, the way things are now, the average American uses 150 gallons of water per day, whereas if you look at the UK, the average person only uses 40 gallons a day, and if you look at China, the number is only 22 gallons. So we see that it is very achievable to actually reduce our consumption of water, and this is something that we can do and we should do unless we want to spend billions of dollars. I don't think I do, I don't think my opponent does. So with that, I'm going to go on to my second contention, that without restrictions on water consumption, we face inevitable environmental damage. Now, we've seen precedent for this. We see the Hetch Hetchy Valley in California, which used to be a scenic valley, used to be some tourist attraction and all that. It was made into a dam, which does not serve as quite as an effective tourist attraction. Another thing, the Salton Sea. Now, this one is worse because the same thing happened here, but it's spreading arsenic and selenium via dust clouds. Now, I think if one thing is certain, it's that I don't want people to be poisoned with dust clouds, and my opponent, I can't speak for him, he probably doesn't either. And so if we really want to avoid people being poisoned as a result of this overuse of water, then we have to decrease our consumption. I think the choice is clear. Decrease our consumption, or let people die by inhaling arsenic. I mean, pretty much, we're left with only one reasonable option. That is to implement the plan I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, which will make the status quo very sustainable and will prevent this environmental damage, like things like the hetchy in the Salton Sea. You know, if we chose to, we could dam up the Grand Canyon or the Yosemite Valley, but why do these things if we have the potential to avoid it? So thank you. With that, I now stand open for cross-examination.
What exactly are you restricting with tax credits?
Okay, so I think what you're getting at here is, are tax credits actually a restriction?
Exactly.
Is that okay? So I think that when you have the government subsidizing one good that is in competition with another good, effectively that other good is restricted because there is a higher financial barrier towards achieving it.
So that goes towards my question, what barrier are you placing for people to be able to use water in the first place?
For people to be able to, we're making it so that if you have to use water, the way that you're going to go about it is in a much more efficient manner.
So your plan is basically an encouragement on how to live a better lifestyle with more sustainable options.
Well, I mean, it's not, I think encouragement is a bit of a light word. I think that we're encouraging people in the place where it counts most, their wallet. And so if we implement these tax credits, we will see a substantial decrease in water consumption.
Now, you also cited that apparently we use triple the amount of water per day as British citizens do.
Well, they use 40, we use 150.
So approximately triple.
Right.
Isn't it true
My
that...
math is a little puzzling.
Isn't it true that also in America we have other means of usage for water that may not simply be personal use?
I think when we look at China, which uses 22 gallons a day, they have much more agriculture than we do. They have much wider variety of usages for water, yet they are still able to keep the amount they use per person at such a low amount. If China can do it, I mean, we can do it too.
Well, isn't China the same population as the U.S.?
It's much larger.
Pardon?
It's much larger.
Is it the same, like, as makeup as the United States? Do Chinese citizens live similar lifestyles as we do?
It depends what aspect of their life you look at.
Well, general house life.
I think there are definite similarities, and I think there are definite differences.
Now, you cited something that said that it would cost us about $1 billion to, I guess, refurbish a desalination plant.
Well, so in San Diego County, very recently, it cost $1 billion to construct one. And, you
Are
know,
there other ways of, I guess, purifying water besides the exorbitantly expensive $1 billion you just cited?
by far the most common alternative means of obtaining water, drinkable water, is via desalination.
Thank you. That concludes the cross-examination. And now we will have the negative case presented.
All right, so my name is Jason Gallons. I'm representing the negative side in this case. And what I'm basically going to try and do in these next 6 minutes is try and encourage the audience to see things from a more humanistic perspective than what Sam's plan really gives you. Now, I agree with all of the non-definitions that he's given so far throughout the round. I'm also going to stress that in order for his plan to be considered effective or feasible, there can't be any single instance of doubt where we physically can look towards Sam's plan and say, hey, you know what, maybe the negative might be better. If you can't think of an alternative, then by all means vote for Sam. But if you can think of any doubt in this case, you have to vote for the negative side. So with that, I have 3 main contentions. The first is that water is the most necessary item to sustain human life. Now, I'm sure most of you here in this room know who John Locke was. He was truly the father of our Constitution. And in the document, there is a very specific phrase which states that all citizens have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and property. I'm going to focus on the first one for a second. The right to life is, according to John Locke, a God-given right that the United States government does not have the authority to take away from the average citizen. And according to the Constitution, which is what the laws of the United States really should be based off of in the first place, that privilege to regulate the ability to live does not rest in the United States. Now, obviously, water is one of the few things in this world that we as humans absolutely need in order to survive. So, essentially, with the restriction of water usage, or in my opponent's case, a plan that doesn't really restrict water in the first place, you're placing a monetary value on the ability or the right to live. Think about it for a second. If you have water that is a public good that shouldn't be liable in consumption, that essentially means that it is essential for every human being to live. Now, I have no problem regulating quality of life, but in terms of ability to live, Sam's plan is both misinformed and reckless. Now, to say that all humans have a right to life is to basically say that all humans have an equal right to life, which means that, again, going back to that same point, the authority to hinder one's ability to live can't rest on the United States government. And that means that if we're placing a monetary value on the ability to live, living is a tax in itself. My second contention is that water restrictions will prove harmful to standard contemporary life. Now, what I mean by this is that modern society has gone so far from the primitive days of conservancy in the 18th century. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you here have showered in the last 24 hours? As I expected, probably like half. That means that you're already using more water than is necessary to be able to survive, but at the same time, government hasn't given us restrictions on water yet, which means that we haven't had a need to have restrictions on water yet. That also means that since we use more water than is absolutely necessary to survive, we have other needs and necessities for water use besides the ones that Sam gave you. For example, we not only drink water, we brush our teeth with water, we shower, we cook, we use a toilet, we use artificial agriculture, steam power. So many different uses of water besides just domestic uses. And that goes to the effect of how if we were to have restrictions on water, which I will stress further, Sam doesn't give us, we also have to look towards the essential part of water's existence. Now, whether we like it or not, it's an essential part of our lives. We've adapted to the point where we can no longer simply rely on water for, say, drinking purposes. We have other uses for it. A restriction on water consumption would only make the situation worse for us, and we don't need to go backwards in our innovation. So to protect the style of life that we have right now, we can't go with Sam's plan, we have to go towards my plan. And finally, water restrictions increase the gap between the wealthy and the poor. Now, as I stated earlier, a restriction places value on the ability to live, but the gap between the wealthy and the poor would only increase due to restrictions. It would only seem to benefit the wealthy in this case. Now, economist Richard Malthus in the 18th century stated that an increase in a wealth gap will lead to more dissatisfied people. Look at Occupy Wall Street, for example. The 99%ers protested on Zuccotti Park for days, weeks even, because they weren't happy with the conditions of living. And if we're going to look towards those types of examples, we have to look towards how an increase in the gap between the wealthy and the poor would play out. Now, the first scenario would be if we impose restrictions that everyone would equalize themselves to the same ability to have resources. And that would mean that if you're rich, you hold on to your resources. If you're poor, you hold on to whatever you can have. So the restrictions on water being forced to pay with the tax, or even being exposed to the encouragement that Sam gives you. Essentially, it means that throughout that entire process, water isn't actually being used as a public good. It's used as an inequalizer to distinguish the wealthy from the poor. But let's say we impose private restriction and we give the ability to the people for the free will to choose for themselves what type of water usage they wish to use. Let's say we go with Sam's plan and we go for, if you use less water, you get tax credits. Well, that means that if you're wealthy, you can bypass those tax credits because your lifestyle is greater in quality than those who are poorer than you and who may need the tax credits and may not be able to actually use the tax credits. So Sam's system is flawed because it doesn't take into account the ideals of equality for human life. And I stress further, one more time, if you're going to restrict water, you're going to restrict quality of life. And if you restrict, or quality of life rather, and if you restrict people's ability to live, then you no longer live in the United States but a communist state. And with that, I say the cross.
Jason, what I think is the most pressing question that's on everyone's mind is, would it kill you to install a low-flush toilet?
If that's the pressing question of the debate, then we shouldn't be having this debate in the first place.
You're not answering my question. Would it kill you to install a low-flush toilet?
I don't think that's relevant to the actual.
Okay, so when you mention John Locke and his life, liberty, property thing, it's not depriving you of your life, liberty, or property if you install a low-flush toilet.
I'm not talking about low-flush toilets. I think you're missing my point, Sam. What I'm talking about is the ability to use water and consume it in the first place. If you can't use a low-flush toilet because you can't afford one, which...
Okay, is water a finite
Depends on how you look at it. From a scientific perspective, no. From an economic
Not from
perspective,
an economic, from a practical perspective. Is there only so much water that we basically have access to? Clean water.
again, from a scientific perspective, that's going to be
Quite a politician. So basically, would you agree in saying that to increase access to clean water, we would need to install things, we would need further processes like desalination?
yes, but not the way that we propose.
Not how not in the way I'm proposing. How's
Well,
there a way to
my problem with your
desalination?
case, Sam, is that you only gave me one example of a $1 billion idea for desalination, but you're ignoring countless other ways that could cost a fraction of
Can
that.
you give me an example of some of those other ways?
For example, purification at home.
Purification.
Purification, which
So you're going
does,
to have the individual person like acquire water from the sea or something and purify it entirely.
that's not what I said. What I'm talking about is home purification systems, which cost
Would
far
you be
less.
willing to go out to Long Island Sound, get some water back to your house, and just purify it as like an afternoon project?
I would.
Can you explain to everyone else?
I think some people in this audience would probably be
Some. You, right, Jason?
just-
What I'm saying is that your plan is not feasible on a large scale, correct?
I'm not offering a plan. All you're offering me is $1 billion idea, which you're giving me.
As the negative, you advocate the status quo. Is that accurate?
I advocate for everything but your plan.
Does that mean the status quo?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So, under your second contention, I guess I'll talk about that for a while. You say that water restrictions are harmful to civilian lives.
To contemporary life.
Yes. What? Okay, so if we are to continue the status quo and our population is growing, won't our problems with water resources also grow with that?
Look, I'm not saying the status quo is perfect as it is right now. We have to make changes. But that's not the negative responsibility. You gave me $1 billion grant for these
Gentlemen, that completes cross-examination. Now, Sam will have an opportunity for rebuttal, which will be followed by Jason's opportunity for rebuttal, and then Sam, is that the floor?
Six, I got you. Okay.
And then Sam, because he has the affirmative, will have the last word in this debate.
Okay. So, for some reason that hurts my feelings, Jason had problems with my case. He said that my plan pretty much just helps the wealthy and it increases the sort of wealth divide that's already present. And I think he's grasping at straws here. Water is a universal resource, and if we were to look at the status quo as, he has to advocate the status quo, he won't admit it, but he does. And if we were to look at the status quo, we see that the wealthy are overwhelmingly the type of people who can afford to obtain water through other resources. So when he says that my plan of offering tax credits for very cheap items that the poor can afford furthers this wealth divide, while he's simultaneously advocating the status quo where rich people can afford access to a resource that poor people simply cannot, there's a bit of a contradiction here. If we want to decrease the wealth divide, which honestly I don't think is really an applicable issue in the case of this resolution, then the last thing we want to do is to continue the status quo and allow certain people access to a fundamental resource, and I agree it's a fundamental resource, that other people do not have access to. So that, I will begin clashing, starting with his first contention. He says, water is the most necessary item, and this is true. It's true that water is an essential resource. It is true that everyone needs water, but there's some issues in how we go about conserving it. So pretty much the problem here is that we're put in this unfortunate spot where yes, water is a fundamental resource. Yes, we absolutely do need water, but unfortunately we're in the predicament where our population is increasing and our supply of water is remaining constant. He continues this status quo. He allows the population to continue to rise without at all increasing the amount of water we have. And maybe we don't see some catastrophic detriments of that right now, but the more years we wait, the longer we wait to do something, the worse this problem will become. If we enact my plan that I mentioned in my first speech, and we reduce the amount of water that we actually consume, then we won't be faced with such a catastrophic situation as we will if we are to further the status quo as Jason would have. to do. So, moving on to his second contention, where he says that water restrictions are harmful to civilian lives. Well, they're not. The fact of the matter is that if you're to reduce the amount of water you consume, this in no way impacts your life in a negative way. In fact, it does the opposite. It increases your quality of life, because if there's one thing that everyone hates doing, it's spending money. If you are to buy these things, then your water bill will decrease. The estimates by this American Water Works Association is about $50, $60 for all of the appliances that I list. So when he says that water restrictions are going to harm civilian lives, well, we can see that the exact opposite is true. Water restrictions, if we encourage people forcefully through monetary maneuvers to decrease their water consumption, then they will have a much better quality of life, because they will be saving money which they can spend on other things besides water. So going on to his third contention, which I sort of addressed at the beginning of my speech, he says that water restrictions increase the gap between the wealthy and the poor. I'm honestly confused as to how he's even arriving at this position. The status quo increases that divide. That's why that divide is there in the first place. It's partially because some people have access to resources that other people absolutely do not. If you want to increase access to water, if you want to make water a more abundant resource that we can all afford to use more of, then we have to reduce our consumption on an individual basis on all of us, so that there's effectively more to go around. However, under his plan, the way we can continue to get more water is only by damming up rivers and doing things like desalination. And under my second contention, I mentioned the harmful effects of this, the hetch-hetchy. I mean, we're losing valuable areas that are very scenic, very awesome, and essentially to acquire more water. Well, if we want to acquire more water, the best way to go about doing that is to decrease our consumption. So, thank you, Irish affirmative ballot.
Okay, so this is going to be my last speech, and I'm going to try and really center around why Sam's plan not only is unfeasible, but simply makes no sense at all. He's advocating for tax credits to help you save water and conserve water. Now, is that really going to help you conserve water? Absolutely not. The tax credits are there to provide for an encouragement. But if you're going to use tax credits to influence water, why not use them in other areas as well? Sam's forgetting that there are so many more areas of the federal government, or of daily life rather, that we can tax besides water. Water is a public good. It's non-rival in consumption, which means that one person's use does not affect the other person's use of that good. It is one of the few public goods in existence. And that means that if we're going to use water as a taxable source, we have to look towards how that gap is going to increase based on what we have in the status quo right now. Now, I don't know why Sam seems to believe that the status quo right now is the reason why our gap is increasing, because if you're going to vote for Sam, you're essentially agreeing with him when he says that the reason we have such a big wealth gap in the U.S. is because of the lack of water restrictions. And I'm pretty sure every single person in this room is smart enough to know that's not really the case. What we can look towards is an example where we need to use water as a public good for reasons of humanity. Now, the argument that Sam made for my first contention really was dropped in the round altogether. He really hasn't touched on it, so I'm going to reinforce that. Now, he hasn't touched on the ideal that water is one of the few goods that shouldn't be restricted because it is essential to human life. Now, more importantly, off of his arguments, he seems to believe that by the status quo right now, I'm already restricting water as a good, when in fact the opposite is true. The status quo may not be the best option, but what Sam fails to recognize is that in the current modern society that we live in right now, water is not only essential to life itself, but also to our way of life. Now, I can certainly agree with Sam when he says that we don't need to use water for all of these different uses. There are plenty of reasons why we use water that may be extraneous, but the fact of the matter is that as we are right now, the ability to adapt currently does not exist within us. So what we have to look towards is whether or not we as a society are ready to change. For example, are all of you here today ready to stop showering once a day and changing that to once every 3 days? I don't think so. Are you all ready? Some of you are. Are all of you today ready to stop brushing your teeth twice a day, changing it to once a day? I don't think so. Are you today ready to change your life in order to change the status quo of water consumption? While we think we can, we can't. It's not in our ability to do so. And Sam's plan is idealistic. And I said before, it's misinformed and it's reckless. Because he wants you to believe in a fantasy where we as the United States can simply make changes to our life and cut expenditures really with the signing of a pen on a document. That's not the way it works, though. There are far more intricate procedures that have a critical role in the government than simply water. And the fact that Sam's focusing so much on water as that restriction to tax water is to tax the ability to live. And so the final argument for humanity's sake, rather, is going to be whether or not we, as decent moral humans, can restrict water. Now, I'll refer to Urinetown here for a second. The plot of the show, from what I understand, is that people aren't allowed to use private bathrooms and instead are forced to use public toilets. Every single citizen is required to do this. And once that happens, the story goes into a fight between the bureaucracy and the lower class. And what Sam's plan does is exactly what the play would imply would happen. The bureaucracy of the government is trying to restrict you from being able to use the amount of water that you are comfortably able to do so today. There are more areas where we can tax than there are that aren't taxed. But a $1 billion desalination plant, just think of the number for a second. A $1 billion desalination plant out of $37.6 trillion in the net capital of the United States. Is that much of an impact to our society? No. Are there other ways to cut that money? Yes. And so to conclude, I'm just going to finalize really what happens if you were to vote for Sam, whereas if you were to vote for me. If you were to vote for Sam's plan, the affirmative, we're going to end up in a society where life is no longer a God-given right. It is not an inalienable right anymore. You have to pay for the ability to live. You're born on this earth, but if you can't pay for your water, you inevitably die. Or you enter the lower class where you're forced to go off of government welfare water and then die. You can't afford that either. So essentially, if you agree with Sam's plan, you agree that different people should have different abilities to live. I'm not talking about quality of life. I'm talking about ability to live. But if you vote for my plan, we state the status quo, we have time to find other options for this resolution. We don't have to go for restrictions on water. I'm okay with encouraging people to use less water. But at the point at which Sam calls this a restriction is the point where Sam becomes a bureaucracy, trying to take away all of your hard-earned dollars for water. Water is a public good. Because we're all here on this earth, we all should have equal access to water. But Sam doesn't believe that. All he wants to do is find other ways to tax you. Is that what you want to vote for? Because that's not a world I want to live in. That's not the United States. That's barbarianism. And that goes back to the ancient Romans where we ended up in a society where we couldn't function without going back to the bureaucracy. If you want your independence, if you want to live in a democratically instilled society, then you have to vote for my plan. Stay away from the influence of bureaucracy and go with the sensible plan. Vote negative. Thank you.
So, Jason presents quite a few doomsday situations. He presents a reality. He says that I present a reality where we do not have equal access to water, where we do not shower, and where we die. That was not what I had in mind when I made my case. Now, the fact of the matter is that putting restrictions on the consumption of water is not the same as taking away people's right to use water. There is at no point where we're going to say, well, it looks like you'll die of thirst, but we can't increase our consumption of water. That's not the sensible solution that I suggest. Rather, what I do is make more efficient means within households, within things like plumbing systems and sinks and toilets, that reduce the amount of water we use without actually having to do anything. This is not restricting access to a fundamental good. This is not, you know, Sam's plan is not to make people die of thirst across the country. That would hardly do anything to solve our problem, and perhaps might cause a few more. So, you know, when he says I'm taxing the ability to live, that's not what I'm doing, because first of all, a tax credit is not the same as taxing people. A tax credit is where you can deduct things from your taxes as a result of purchasing something. Basically, if you purchase these things that make your water consumption more efficient, you pay less taxes. So I think he's completely misrepresenting my argument here when he says I'm taxing something like water. No, that's not what's happening. So pretty much, I'm not restricting the equal access to water. I am surely not making it so people can't shower. I am surely not making it so that people die. That would be, all three of those are very unpopular viewpoints, and I surely wouldn't get up in front of people and advocate them. So pretty much, all I'm doing is leading us towards a sensible solution where, again, we don't have to breathe in arsenic. I think it's interesting my opponent never mentioned that. Perhaps he's in favor of breathing in arsenic. I don't know. He didn't talk about it. So the fact of the matter is that if we continue to use too much water, then we're going to have to breathe in arsenic, because we're going to drain lakes. We're going to have to dam up rivers to get more access, or we're going to have to spend billions of dollars. And even when you use $1 billion as just a fraction of the total deficit, that's not important. The fact is, in absolute terms, it's a lot of money. And if we can avoid spending $1 billion, we should avoid spending $1 billion. Regardless of if avoiding spending $1 billion will, you know, cure the economic crisis in the Eurozone and Greece. No, that's not what I'm contending. In summation, there have been a bunch of misrepresented arguments here. But I want people to live, and I want them to continue showering. Thank you, I urge no further.
Well, thank you to both of our debaters. I think they did an excellent job on an interesting topic. And we'd like to open it up for your thoughts. I don't think it's necessary for anyone to come up to the stage unless they'd like to do so. But we'd really like to hear from you and see what arguments you thought were persuasive, what points interested you. And if you can just raise your hand and stand up and let us know your thoughts.
No, it's okay. You can just say it from there. Just yell out.
Well, I would like to thank Jason and Sam for throughout the debate. I thought Sam made some very good arguments and some very logical points. Jason, you did a good job. I think a lot of what you're doing was kind of building off his points to make them look extreme. And I thought Sam really used his last speech to clarify what you were saying and disprove most of what you were saying. So, although you did a good job, I would say that the debate was Sam, but good job.
Let's not try to say who we necessarily thought won at this stage. What we'd really like to focus on at the start is what points were persuasive to you? What arguments do you think matter to you in terms of why we should restrict water use or why we shouldn't restrict water use? I'm having a little trouble seeing out there, so if you have something to say, just please stand up and let me hear from you. Go ahead.
That people do not like paying taxes. So restricting the water would give us tax credits, which would lower our taxes and our bills for the water. So, and I think that's probably
So you think people might be a little bit more willing to use less water if they got a tax credit for it? Thank you. Yeah.
One thing that I noticed is that you talk about getting more efficient height and more efficient loads. But what about the people who have to pay for them? So what if people in Conab or what if people in big towns can't afford it? Are you guys going to pay for it? And who's going to pay? Is Congress going to have less taxes? We have over $1 trillion debt. I don't think that your idea is very solid.
So you're afraid you're concerned that if we restrict the use of water, then it's going to cost more to use water, and that's not going to be fair. Thank you.
Right here.
Up here. Go ahead.
Okay, now wait back. Stand up. Can you come
gonna have to be loud.
Hello? Well, it was a good debate, and there were a lot of really long words, but when I was at Northeast Elementary School, they taught us about this thing called the water cycle. And that means that, no, listen, this is good. That means that water comes down from clouds and it goes in the ocean. No, stop, this is good stuff. I remember this. There was a song and everything. And you drink, I'm about to make my point, I'm getting this, so thank you. When you drink water and you consume water, it evaporates and goes back up in clouds and then it rains down again. So I'm not too worried. Thank you.
Plenty of water and therefore no need to restrict it?
Yes, sir.
I think it's pretty interesting.
Good. Thank you.
I seem to remember Calvin being in our Northeast musical, Willy Wonka, where he played Mr. Salt. What does that mean?
Stay on point, stay on topic. Who else has something they'd like to share? Please, go ahead, right in front.
Up here. Oh, up there. All right, just start talking. Hi guys. So Jason mentioned the show and how the government posed all these taxes. I just want to say that when we eventually overthrow the government in the show, everyone dies. I just wanted to say that, so I think that some restriction is necessary because I don't want to die.
Thank you. Your point is that well, quiet please, let's respect what everyone says.
Well, to begin with, I feel like the point that young John was made was pointless because
Let's just make your point, please.
But they both made very nice quotes, but even if the point that Jason made over-exaggerate what Sam was trying to say, Jason in a way is right, because water is an actual source that we are all able to have, and if we can pay for the stuff that we need to be able to move, like us personally can't pay for the ties and stuff like that, like the other weekends, then who is? And if that is, then we're just going to be a difference between the rich and the poor, which will just lead us into more problems that the United States already has.
So your concern is that restrictions would be unfair. It would be unfair to people who, that the rich would benefit more.
That's one, but not just unfair. It's like, it will just make the economic problem we have right now, the whole country, even bigger because not everyone can actually be able to do this. So if the poor can do it, then the rich won't even do it either.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for a couple more comments. Does anybody else want to be heard in terms of their thoughts? Over there, please. Quiet, please.
One of the things that Sam said was that other countries are really considering on their water consumption, and that our country is way behind in this race. So I think that if other countries can do it, we have the resources that we should do it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right there.
Okay. So Sam was mentioning near the end about a tax benefit to to produce their water. And he was also saying that it's a big issue that we're going to be spending billions of dollars on desalination plants. And I'm kind of disappointed in Jason when AP Gov, and he didn't really mention this, but we're going to give huge tax benefits to people who decide to decrease their water usage, and that's going to create a much bigger deficit in total tax revenue that the government takes in every year. And so even if like every person saves $3, then we're still over $1 billion in losses in the long run. So I think that that's another big issue with zero tax.
Other comments? Yeah? Anybody else? Okay. Well, I'd like to do two things then. Before we give a final thank you to our debaters, I'd like you to vote with your applause. Hold on a second. If you're in favor of the affirmative position that the United States should increase its water restrictions, please applaud. Now, if you're in favor of the negative position that the United States should not increase restrictions on water consumption, please applaud.
Declare a winner. So, because you know what, ultimately we don't really know the answers to the questions that we face right now. I want to thank Sam and Jason for really raising the bar on this debate. You both prepared tremendously, and you definitely demonstrated your chops with debating, and I applaud you both. To our audience, I want to thank you for being really a great audience. I think you listened to the debate, and I was very impressed with the questions that you asked. I think now that you have a little understanding of what we wanted to present to you here, pay attention when you listen to the news stories on the radio or you read the newspaper. This is a relevant issue in today's times. Think about how you use your water at home. Are you running the water when you're brushing your teeth? Or are you watering your lawn during the hottest hours of the day? Do you have water flow units in your shower heads? Things like that. I mean, there are ways, short of government restrictions, that are voluntary for you to reduce your water usage, which these are things that I think that we should be cognizant of. So if you want to find out what happens, all right, I encourage you all to come to the show. I would like to offer our debaters free tickets to see the show this weekend. So come on, and thank you so much. I think the classes can go to the third lunch wave. Thank you so much.